Good morning, live weather blog meteorologist Bob Acanfrio with today's tropical update for Sunday, August 1st, 2010. We have our latest invest now out in the Central Atlantic that we'll be watching. This one we could be watching for a while. This is Invest 91L, formerly known as Invest 90L. 90L was deactivated yesterday by the National Hurricane Center, which I was kind of surprised upon, but they did deactivate it. And now we have 91L. 91L was kind of that tropical wave that was east of 90L, and now it's kind of got involved in this whole system here. Pretty broad area of low pressure right now, down pretty far south here. Saw a nice blow up of convection last night, kind of waning a little bit now. We have a little bit of easterly shear out here, which could be affecting this system today. But we're starting to see a little bit of outflow here. It's trying to develop. System's starting to move a little farther north, so it's trying to get away from the ITCZ. National Hurricane Center gives this a 60% chance of developing into a tropical system next 48 hours. That's about right. I mean, I might pin it down more to 40 or 50% just because I think it's kind of going to be a slow nature developing. This is a pretty large system and still pretty far south, although it's starting to finally creep north. So this might take a little time to kind of get developed here. Let me show you the visible satellite next here. And here's the visible, latest visible here this morning. And you can see it's getting there. Still pretty broad and large here. Really no definite center yet of circulation. So it's kind of taking its time getting itself together. And we'll see how this develops in the next few days here. Okay, bigger picture we're going to look at here. Here's the system. It's way out here in the Central Atlantic. Going to be a slow mover. I don't expect it really to get toward, if it does affect any part of the islands here, probably won't be till about Thursday or Friday. So we have all week to watch this system. Still some drier air north of the system here. We were watching this tropical wave here that the National Hurricane Center gave 10% to, but doesn't have much time to develop, probably looking the best it has the whole time across the Caribbean, but this will move into Central America and not be a threat. Water vapor loop here, and you can see that dry air here, but a nice moist envelope around the system. Dry air could be a factor with this system, but larger systems like this tend to fight off that dry air a bit. So we'll have to see what kind of effect this has on it. It has a pretty big moist envelope right now around it, which is good. We'll have to see what happens as it moves north. Will that dry air affect it or not? We'll have to see there. Still watching a couple tuts trying to move south again. So shear is still strong here, right in this area across the Caribbean here. And here's our shear map, latest shear map. You can see a little bit about 10, 15 knots of easterly shear on our system right now, and that could be affecting it a little bit today. Shear looks pretty low out ahead of it, and we're going to have to watch these tuts. This has been the pattern all this tropical season as they keep diving down into the Caribbean, and this has created a lot of shear in this area. Starting to lift north a little bit. We've seen, as we get into August, the shear gradually lifting northward. Still a lot of shear to the north of the islands, and we'll see what role that plays in this system down the road. I mean, this could actually get into a very favorable position north of the islands, or as it approaches the islands, because as these tuts sink south, they've been creating a nice little bubble of high pressure to the east of the islands. So that could be pretty favorable down the road, and we could be looking at a hurricane approaching the Leeward or Windward Islands by the end of the week. So something to keep in mind here as these tuts kind of move, and we'll kind of see what exact positioning they have on them. Saharan air layer, pretty far north of the system. Again, as the system moves north, it could get into some of this drier air, and we'll have to see what effect that has. But again, pretty large system here, which is, for development, is good news for this system. Bad news if you don't want this thing to develop, which we really don't want to. We don't want to see a big system moving towards the United States anytime soon, but they don't get affected by this dry air too much, so we'll have to see. Okay, let's go through the latest models now. This is courtesy of Clark Evans, FSU. This is the first models that were run on Invest 91 earlier this morning, and you can see it takes it north of the islands, and this is about Thursday, Friday time frame. And what it's going to be showing, and I'll show you the models in a minute. I'll go through the different scenarios. I just want to run through these real quick here. So basically north of the islands here, First run intensity models, again, cranking this thing up to a Category 1 hurricane before it gets to the islands. Intensity models have been pretty, not really doing too well this year so far, so we'll have to see. But again, this basically is showing you that there's going to be low shear ahead of this system, and that looks like that'll be the case until it gets to the islands. Okay, let's run through the global models here. This is the Canadian model. Been showing you this model the last few days, and again, brings it up to a hurricane as it gets, and then it brings it north of the islands. Looks like the Canadian model is having a much stronger weakness here along the east coast, and this is going to be the major factor, is whether this goes out to sea, affects the east coast, affects Florida, or moves into the Gulf of Mexico. It's going to depend on this weakness out here that's going to be developing along the east coast. Will it catch the weakness? Which model has a stronger high pressure building back in? Will it want to go towards the weakness and then bend back to the west? A lot of scenarios right now. I think the stronger this system is before it reaches the islands, then it's going to miss the islands. If the system stays rather weak, it could go farther south and move across the islands and maybe move across the island chain and weaken. That's a possibility as well. It'll just depend on the strength before it gets to the islands, whether it moves north of the islands. So that's our first impact here. So again, northern Leeward Islands, Puerto Rico, Hispaniola, Bahamas, and then eventually Florida, and then up the east coast. This is a whole area of concern right now for this system. Probably a little less of a concern for the Gulf of Mexico right now, but you know, this far out, you can't take anybody off the mat here, so we'll have to see. Okay, no gaps model, little weaker system, and this is out to about Friday, and you can see it brings it farther south. So as I said, a weaker system will tend to move this system farther south before the islands, so we'll have to watch for that scenario as well. Then we have the UK Met model. This is again valid for Friday. You can see it north of the islands. And we have our friend the Euro model. This is valid for Friday. You can see it kept it actually a little weaker to begin with. So that's why it makes it into the islands here. As I said, a little weaker system before the islands will keep this system farther south. So it's really going to depend on strength, will be whether it goes north or south of the islands here. So this is valid for Friday. And then we're going to take it out to Saturday. You see, just near the island chain here. And then this is valid for next weekend, next Sunday, 7 days out. Again, 7 days out, these models could be anywhere, but you can see it's taking it more on a west-northwest route, and then eventually it dumps it into the Gulf of Mexico. So that's the Euro model right now. Again, long way off. Don't get worried about anything if you're living in the Gulf of Mexico or anything like that. This is a long way off, but it keeps a stronger high. Weakness is not much of a big weakness along the East Coast. So that's the Euro model, and there it is, into the Gulf of Mexico by Tuesday the 10th. GFS, again, north of the islands by Friday. This actually is a little quicker too in speed. I don't know if it's going to be moving that fast. We'll have to see about that. But north of the islands here, and then we'll move, and this is for next Sunday, again, a week out. Here it is approaching the Bahamas, and then what happens is the GFS actually takes it into Florida. Little bit of a weakness it develops, but not strong enough to hook it up the coast or hook it out to sea. So you see a lot of variables that far out. We'll have to see. Definitely a threat, like I said, northern Leeward Islands, the whole island chain, Puerto Rico, and then eventually Bahamas, Florida, up the East Coast. Anybody could get this one if it does develop. And just want to quickly show you the NAO. Now this could mean whether we're going to have that trough along the East Coast. NAO wants to dip into the negative part here. That could create a troughiness pattern along the East Coast, so we'll have to see. I think this system will definitely eventually feel the effect of that trough a little bit. But how strong it will be, and does the gap close up and then it moves more west-northwest, maybe into the Gulf or into Florida, or does it hook up the East Coast? Those are the variables right now. I will have more on the Invest 91L possibly later tonight. If not, I will have another full update tomorrow morning. You all have a good day and have a great Sunday. Bye-bye.